Our guest today is former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Newt, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you great. I am excited about your new documentary coming out. Why don't you tell me a little bit about it?
Well, we're thrilled to be on PBS tonight at 10 p.m. It's called Journey to America, and it is 9 people who came to the United States legally and have made us a better country and a stronger country. And we did it to draw the contrast. We're both, Callista and I, are very opposed to illegal immigration, but at the same time, we are very much in favor of legal immigration. And so we wanted to communicate that, we really get a lot as a country out of people who come here voluntarily. It's really remarkable. And I think that it's something that people will find very educational and very interesting, because we've had a lot of really interesting people come to the United States. And this show on PBS tries to really communicate just how big a deal it is.
Now, what do you think it is? I mean, for example, when you're suffering in another country and you come over here, and you don't have the same opportunity, do you think these people have a little more motivation to succeed than, let's say, somebody born here?
Yeah, I always tell people that there are 2 kinds of immigrants. There are temporal immigrants called children, and there are geographic immigrants who come from other countries. And the geographic immigrants know that the difference in the quality of life is so enormous that they really have a great opportunity in America to pursue happiness, to become successful, and to live in a country that obeys the rule of law and the Constitution. And so I think from that standpoint, there's no question that they're excited. And I find, as a general rule, that the first-generation immigrants are, in fact, more patriotic, more committed, have a deeper sense of what has made America great than a lot of young people who grow up here, take it all for granted, and don't pay attention to it.
I mean, I've always wondered that. I had the benefit of serving in our military, so I have an appreciation for things. But do you think we get spoiled, growing up here and not knowing how tough it is in other countries?
Yeah, I think that it's a real problem, because a lot of people, first of all, the schools have all too many teachers who don't like America and don't like the Constitution and don't like our history. And second, I think, if you're used to working hard, that's one thing. If you're not used to working hard, then that's a different kind of situation. And unfortunately, all too many young Americans, not just wealthy, but even poor young Americans, the welfare state has convinced them that as long as they can apply for food stamps and public housing, they don't have to work very hard. And I think that's a tragedy. And I think it's something that we really have to consider in the future. How do we get back to a work ethic for every American? When we did welfare reform in 1996, it was the most successful conservative social reform in modern history. We had a huge number of people get off of welfare. They got jobs. They rose. Their children were doing better. We had the biggest number of children leaving poverty after welfare reform in 96 than any other time in American history. And that's because work matters. Work changes you. And if you're a child, watching your parents get up every day and go to work also has an impact. Watching your parents get up every day and simply go and get food stamps or sit around and wait, that also is something.
Well, COVID kept a lot of people at home, and I don't know the answer. How do we get everyone back to work again?
Well, you don't pay them if they don't show up. Not complicated. And you change all the welfare rules so there's a work requirement. You don't give people anything. I mean, America was not built by giving people things. America was built by allowing people to pursue happiness. Note the term. We're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence does not guarantee us happiness. It guarantees us an opportunity.
Now, what's interesting is when you were Speaker of the House, basically the internet didn't exist. There was no social media. There was no nothing. We relied on news sources to get us news. How do you think that change has affected politics nowadays?
Well, I think the ecosystem of communication is so different from when I started running. And I think Trump sort of mastered it this year. If the most popular podcast is 3 hours, you go to Dallas and you do 3 hours. And I think the fact that Kamala literally could not have survived 3 hours told people a lot. If if TikTok matters, and then you find people on TikTok who want to talk about it. And if you think about it, Trump has this genius, which I think he probably really developed doing The Apprentice for 13 years, which nobody in the political news media ever seemed to understand. But he spent 13 years with a top-rated TV show. And so you say one way to communicate is to do something everybody has to cover and talk about. So, you go and you work at McDonald's. So can you imagine the total coverage that he got working at McDonald's that Saturday? Or you fly in and have a garbage truck waiting for you. By the way, somebody told me last night that the garbage truck's going to be in the inaugural parade, which is just hysterical. But those things penetrate to everybody, Everybody can identify with them. 87% of the country goes to McDonald's at least once a year. And a friend of mine said that's actually not accurate, that another 7% go, but they're ashamed to admit it.
That's pretty funny. I never thought of that too much. I guess being Speaker of the House, I can't imagine, the responsibility. I mean, a lot of people, they get little snippets of what that life was like. What was the hardest thing being Speaker of the House?
I think balancing the desire of my members and the reality of a Democratic president, because we could get a lot done, but we couldn't get everything done. And in the end, I only lasted 4 years, in part because even though we had balanced the budget for 4 consecutive years for the only time in the last century, we'd passed welfare reform, we'd invented Medicare Advantage, and we did a whole range of tax cuts and reforming the FDA, reforming telecommunications. In the end, there was about 20 members of my party for whom that wasn't enough. And so you're always sort of balancing that. I have the greatest respect for Mike Johnson because he is just amazing in what he has been doing. And I really think that I could not do his job. You have a 1 or 2 or 3 vote margin. That means any morning out of the 220 some people you're leading, any morning, 2 or 3 of them can screw everything up. And so you've got to just pay attention at a level that I was probably incapable of.
I just can't even imagine that. The weirdest thing about what I do is I'm also an attorney. I've taken at least 8 bars. I've studied the Constitution. And over the last couple of years, it seems every time a party wants to get something through where they can't get it through, they want to change the rules. They want to change the number of Supreme Court justices there. And I can't tell people how dangerous that is, just because you're not getting your way. I mean, I'm sure you have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I think that ultimately governing is a team sport. And ultimately you're either on the team or you're not. And it's like a football game. Imagine in the middle of the Super Bowl, one of the guys decided he wasn't going to play, and he just, let the other team run over him. That would guarantee that the whole team loses. So you have to somehow communicate that we're more than just individuals, that we're a team, and that we owe it to the team to do things.
I mean, it's so difficult to imagine that we would change, the number of Supreme Court justices we have and everything else simply because we don't like certain things instead of waiting out and maybe changing justices out.
Oh, yeah. But that's exactly what happens is people decide, if I don't get exactly what I want. I used to tell people that Teddy Kennedy would get awake and say, the answer is more money. What's the question? Well, you have a handful of Republicans who get awake and say, I'm voting no. What's the issue?
Yeah, that's hard when you think about it. And I think one of the problems is our media cycles are so quick, and I don't think we really fact check our anything anymore. I mean, I go on the news and I see somebody go, well, a rumor here and a rumor here. I mean, has the media changed so significantly that we might not be able to trust what we're hearing?
Absolutely. I mean, you've had, for a lot of different reasons. For one thing, you have a much more partisan media where what matters is what they want to tell you. And I think that's different than what people normally are involved with. Second, I think it's important to recognize that as the media is broken down, the sheer professionalism has disappeared. I mean, in the old days, if you were on CBS News, you would spend a lot of time learning to be a reporter, learning how to judge sources, and they had a standard that was real. Now I think what you're seeing is a very different time.
I mean, how difficult is it for you? You're sitting in the middle of an interview with, let's say, a more hostile news company, and they're just waiting for those gotcha moments. In your career, I'm sure you sat down for a bunch of these. I mean, what do you do when you're just sitting there and waiting for the attack to happen?
You just relax. I mean, look, I've done this for so many years, and I've been attacked by so many people. I don't worry about it. It's part of a free society is that people get to be different, and people get to talk to each other, and you just have to relax and live it out.
Now, I have a lot of listeners, and a lot of people want to make a difference in this world. And somebody comes to you, a young person, he's 18, 19 years old. He says, listen, I want to be in Congress someday. I want to do more for my country. What advice would you give me as far as a direction? Do I join the military? Do I just go to college? What would be a good path for me?
Well, what I would say to them is two things. Read as widely as you can. Read biographies. Read about people who've succeeded. Read about elections, so you really thoroughly know what you're talking about. And second, find campaigns to be a volunteer. Politics is so complicated that it's much better to have a personal, real experience. And you get that by you show up. When I was a junior in high school, I went to the Nixon Lodge campaign in Columbus, Georgia, and there were almost no Republicans in Georgia back then. And so the process of I walked in the door, they were thrilled, and they promptly had me, folding envelopes and putting on stamps. And it wasn't glamorous, but I began learning the business, and I think that's a key part of this.
It's funny you brought that up when. I had a discussion about this just recently when they were talking about presidents and everything, and President Nixon. You think about what he went through at the end, where it was an issue of presidents can't lie, presidents can't say things that are untruthful. When did that stop?
I think that gradually. I mean, in some ways, it's always been there. We used to have, for example, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson each financed a newspaper to attack the other. Now, they were serving in the cabinet. Hamilton was Secretary of the Treasury. Jefferson was the Secretary of State, but they hated each other. And so literally they each put up a newspaper to attack the other. So some of this has very deep roots in the American system. And I tell people, it's okay. Out of all the noise, we figure out eventually what's the truth.
You were a professor and you had the opportunity to teach students. And are you ever frustrated that history changes on whims, whether it be from movies, whether it be from opinions change, or just rewriting it?
Well, I don't know the change. I mean, I don't know the history itself changes, but the interpretations change. But that's always been true. You had, for example, the British radical named Thomas Paine came to the United States back when we were still colonies, wrote the most important single pamphlet in the Revolutionary War called Common Sense. And then when the war was, which was published about the time as the Declaration of Independence, and was the most widely read single document in that period, and the war was going badly, Washington asked him that fall, write another pamphlet and explain to us why this is so hard. And he wrote a pamphlet called basically it's called The Crisis, which basically said, it opens with, these are the times that try men's souls. And he says, hell is not easily, and we have to persevere. It had a galvanizing effect on people. Now, that was propaganda. It wasn't technically news in the sense you mean it, but it was the most effective single information source, those two pamphlets, in the entire American Revolution.
It's hard for the average person to, discover the truth and everything like that. And there was a lot of issues that came in this last election. Like, how does somebody win the primaries and you just substitute somebody else? I mean, even I, who big study of the Constitution, was going, how does that even happen? How do you even explain that to the people? I mean, everyone asked me the legality of that. And I said, well, I guess people can vote for who they want to vote for and parties can do that. I mean, when that happened, has that ever happened before in our history?
Yeah, I think it's always been a challenge to figure out what do you believe. And when you have partisan politics, Andrew Jackson was so controversial, and the establishment hated him because he was a genuine populist, and he represented the West, and he represented the blue-collar working class, and he was very controversial president who killed the Bank of the United States, which was the biggest single institution in the country at the time, and the bias against him was so great that he's president from 1828 to 1836. The first positive biography of him is by Arthur Schlesinger Jr. I think it's in 1936. Basically, almost a century with nobody writing positive because the elite establishment have all decided that they despise him and they hate him.
Oof. They're tough times. Now, I know you went through a lot. You represented our country for a very long time. What do you think in your heart, was the most difficult moment in our country while you were serving?
I think probably the decision to go to war in 1991. I think that we had to do it. Saddam had seized Kuwait, and we couldn't allow that to stand. But it was a vote to send young men and women to die. And I think that's always has to be a vote of conscience. I was the whip at the time, and I would tell members, I'm not going to ask you to do this. I'm going to ask you to look at your own conscience. And whichever way you vote, I'm going to support you and recognize that you are doing this based on your conscience.
Now, that's interesting because we talk about the greater good when we think of that. I mean, how difficult it is for you when you're sitting at the top of this, chain, and you're going, this is good for us, but it's going to cause me a lot of nightmares.
Right, and I always admire presidents who pick up the phone and call families and say, your son or daughter was killed in battle today, and they died for America. And I just wanted you to know that your country is very grateful. It's a very sad thing. I mean, that's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've gotten many letters from veterans and their families asking for help. I mean, how difficult it is for our veterans to be taken care of nowadays.
Yeah, I think that's part of it is that, and of course, we have a very large Veterans Administration. It needs to be reformed and overhauled. But nonetheless, the country, going all the way back to Lincoln and the Civil War, the country has had a very deep commitment to veterans and should. These are people who risk their lives and whether they get killed or they get deeply wounded, they have done that on behalf of the nation.
Now, we have a huge homeless population, and there are a lot of veterans on the street. Where can they go? Do you have any idea what they can do to get the help they need?
Sure. I think, first of all, we need to recognize we made a huge mistake in the 50s and 60s when we closed the mental hospitals. We had this theory that you could put people in group homes of 8 to 20 people, and they'd somehow be better off. It turned out not to work. A very large percentage of the homeless, in fact, are people who have mental problems. And you've got to decide, is there freedom to avoid taking the right drugs and to live on the street more important than your freedom to live in a country that doesn't have thousands and thousands of people on the street? And that's a balancing act. But I think ultimately our goal has to be not how do we take better care of them on the street, but how do we get them off the street? And if that means building group homes, or if that means reopening mental hospitals and having drug addiction requirements. I thought it was very significant that San Francisco, for all of its liberalism, has now said that if you test for drugs, you cannot get any kind of public aid unless you go into a drug treatment program, period. Because they were just tired of it. They were tired of needles on the street. They were tired of human feces on the street. And it finally got bad enough.
Well, I can't tell you how great it's been talking to you, Newt. Your documentary, Journey to America, premieres tonight on January 14th at 10 p.m. And I really look forward to watching it and talking to you again.